Hey, everybody. Welcome to Cinema Gulp. I'm John.
And I'm Ben, and today we are talking about what we love about Bruce, Mr. Falcon Willis.
Yippee-ki-yay!
Mr. Falcon.
So thank you everybody for watching and clicking on this video. We really appreciate it. Big dog Bruce Willis, who we love, has been diagnosed with aphasia, I believe you say. It's a language disorder, John, caused by like damage to specific areas of the brain, which has a lot to do with the control of the language expression and comprehension that you give. So he has officially retired from acting. Very sad news, though. We haven't really, I don't know the last time we had a quote unquote theatrical Bruce Willis movie. Now you can finally say, like, we're never going to have another one. And even though that seemed like it had sailed away anyway, it's kind of sad to hear that news.
I want to say the last film in the theater that I saw that was a great film of Bruce Willis's was Moonrise Kingdom, but that's not really, it's such an ensemble piece and he's a small part of it. It's not a Bruce Willis movie, but it's been a long time since I've gone to the cinema and seen Bruce Willis even up on the screen, I think.
Yeah, you think back to those days where Bruce Willis was such a good team player and he did do small parts and he did do cameos in movies and he always brought it, back in the day. So,
well, and we're going to talk about some of our favorite Bruce Willis movies. And I think that takes us back to Bruce's heyday. I mean, I don't know your list, but I'm just taking a guess that we're going to talk a lot about movies that maybe came out in the 90s, some in the early 2000s for Bruce. And that was his heyday. And I think he had kind of an interesting ride, I thought, at least the way I saw it during those days. It seemed like he was always being written off. It was like, oh, he's this new action star, a little bit different than the typical 80s action star, the everyman. And when his action movies weren't the biggest hits, he was immediately written off of, okay, well, there was his opportunity. He's over with. And I feel like he constantly had to reinvent himself in the eyes of Hollywood and the audience to prove, hey, no, Bruce isn't going anywhere. He's still a star. And the 90s relied so much on who is a star, who's bankable. It was all about whose name sold movies.
And he did so much reinventing of himself. He even did the craze that Basic Instinct started, the sex thriller. He did a very awkward, weird, misguided sex thriller.
That might be one of his worst ever. Color of Night.
I always say balls in the pool.
Oh my God. That was
a very underrated movie his. I think it's called like Last Man Standing, which is kind of like a noirish Western movie. Like the remake, people just kind of wrote it off.
One of the Clint Eastwood ones, I'm forgetting if it's Fistful of Dollars or For a Few Dollars More, but one of those stories.
It's the exact same story as High Plains Drifter, but that's the exact same story of 100 of the Eastwood movies,
Sure. He started off with such a great movie with Die Hard. It wasn't his first ever movie, but his first big starring role, his break in Hollywood where no one's ever going to forget that character in that film. Every movie that came after it that was an attempt to be an action hero that wasn't a big hit, he was written off as like, oh no, Bruce Willis sucks now.
So he started out mostly in TV on Moonlighting, and people saw that charisma, the timing, the kind of the wit and the quirkiness of the character.
Well, don't be ridiculous. He's not going to win. He won last year. They're not going to give it to him again. I
think Hollywood took a huge chance. We're not going to get into the history of the Die Hard movie because that, I don't know if you know, but obviously it was from a movie that was just, I think it was based on Nakatomi, and at one point, like Frank Sinatra was supposed to be the lead character in that movie, all kinds of weird shit. But the fact that like Hollywood said, like, you know what, let's just take like a charming everyman guy instead of like a Stallone or a Schwarzenegger and just put him in this situation. Because that way there's tension, there's stakes. It's just a dude, and I think that what a great move that was, because the most non-action star is the guy with what a lot of people call the best action movie ever made. And the big buff guys never got that, that's arguable. There's T2 and stuff, but.
No, but I agree with that's what helps elevate that film is his performance, totally. The believability of him in the everyman role, and how it raises the stakes in that movie. But yeah, a lot of it is just him in that role. It could have been anybody else in that role, and maybe Die Hard would not be the film that we all almost all still considered to be one of the best.
Because he's a catalyst of us in that movie. It's like, oh shit, what if I was visiting my ex-wife at a fucking Christmas party and this happened? It's almost like one of those dreams you have where you get to be an action hero, you know?
Well, since we're talking about Die Hard, should we go from 1 to 5? Because I feel like we're talking about the top of the tier at the moment. Or do you want to?
You know what? We're gonna be a little different, folks. We're gonna talk about the highest mountain of Bruce, and then we'll just add a couple of things.
Come out to the coast. We'll get together, have a few laughs.
Okay, let's get into it. So for me, number 1, here's where it's a little different for me, because though I know that 2 and 4 are nowhere as good as 1 and 3, well, that's arguable. 1 is a masterpiece of an action movie. You have the cinematographer who went on to direct some of the other greater action movies like Speed. And then you have McTiernan, top of his game. But I like to look at Die Hard 1, 2, 3, and 4 as like, if they had just stopped there, which you could just say they stopped there because that 5th one wasn't even really a Die Hard movie. People say what you want about Part 4. I actually love Part 4. And if you watch the R-rated cut, it's a perfect, it's a great Die Hard sequel. It's just as good as the other sequels. But I love to look at the John McClane character arc from 1988 to 2007 and close it there. Obviously, we're talking about Die Hard, the first one, but I wanted to say 1 through 4 are great action movies. And if you want to have like an action marathon of a franchise, 1 through it holds up better than the Lethal Weapon sequels eventually do. So to me,
I agree with that. Yeah. And I mean, that's a great comparison, the Lethal Weapon series. I've always really loved 2. People always say that 3 is their second favorite in the series. I think 3 has a great premise and setup, but it falls apart as the movie goes along.
Falls apart at the end.
Too coincidental. Whereas 2, I mean, 1 is so much of a perfect movie. It's my 6th favorite movie of all time. So 2 is never going to get even close to it, but 2 is just such a solid sequel and wonderful follow-up to the first one. You get a lot of what you love about the first one.
The second one is the last one where he actually feels exactly like the same John McClane.
Yeah.
As much as I love the third one, they kind of ramp up the comedy a little bit, which it needed. But 1 and 2, it feels exactly like the same character.
Top of the mountain for Bruce was Die Hard. Thankfully, that became a great series that had a lot of fun sequels. I think with this news, we're not even going to really get whatever version because they talked about making this 5th one where it was a prequel. Seems like a stupid idea.
That would be the 6th one, actually.
Or writing off
the 5th one was such a piece of shit.
Dead's dead, baby. Dead's dead.
On to our number 2s, which I'm a little bit torn because now that we're doing the order this way, my true number 2 in terms of movies, just if you take the list of movies that Bruce Willis has been in, Pulp Fiction. I mean, it's such an ensemble piece. It's such a director's piece. It's a Quentin Tarantino movie first before you think of it as anything else. Thinking of it as a Bruce Willis movie would be 5 or 6 rungs down the list in terms of how I picture the movie. I think of it as John Travolta and Samuel L. Jackson and the combination of those two, even Uma Thurman to some degree more before I really think of Butch. Butch is a great character. There's a number of scenes in the movie where like Butch and his girlfriend are some of the slowest, most uninteresting scenes for me. So it's like when I do think of the perfection of Pulp Fiction, there's a couple moments that are tied to Bruce Willis that are my least favorite of the film. But how do you put Pulp Fiction anywhere? Can't knock it too far down the list because it's just such a wonderful, amazing movie. And Bruce is great in it, very memorable. His aspect, his part of the story with Ving Rhames. There's so many surprises. Like I think Pulp Fiction's filled with surprising stuff, but where that storyline goes is probably some of the most surprising of the whole film. And so could never forget Pulp Fiction in a list of top 10 or top 5 for Bruce Willis.
I think he was at the time the biggest movie star. So they plastered him on the posters, which they should anyway, because it's an ensemble and he's one of the main characters. He has his own story. And, I agree with you. So much of the stuff with Butch, the pacing of it probably has a lot to do with Roger Avery is the one who wrote that vignette. He wrote the Butch stuff, not Tarantino, you know.
Oh, okay.
Roger Avery got a story by credit, and I know he's the one that wrote the Butch scenes, but Tarantino probably, did some good dialogue stuff. But my second is 12 Monkeys, and I'm with you where it's like now it gets to the point where is it my favorite movie, or am I looking more of like what Bruce contributed to it? Because I do think it's one of his most intense, subtle, haunted performances. I know he gets overshadowed a little bit, in the Brad Pitt scenes, but those are so few and far between. I think when people remember the movie, they think Brad Pitt's in it more than he is, and he's not in that much of it. But I think that movie is so, it's one or two my favorite Gilliam, that and Fear and Loathing. Like I love that movie. I love his performance. He goes all in with the physicality, and like I think in 1995 that might have been from Pulp Fiction, with him going, I want to do these different things. It's not an action movie at all. Yeah, I don't know. The 12 Monkeys just stands out to me as like, God damn, Bruce was good in that. He committed to it. It's a fucking weird movie. So yeah, that's my number 2.
So yeah, I have 12 Monkeys as my number 4, but so that's got us skipping around because if I was to talk about, I agree with everything you're saying there. 12 Monkeys, it's actually a really great Bruce Willis performance, I think, because I think Bruce is one of those personas that what you're gonna get for the most part. You hire him to bring what he brings, and there's a lot of actors that fit that role where they're still considered great actors, yet they are pretty much their persona. That's what they bring every time. And they rarely play, even when they do play something that's supposed to be well outside of that, you can tell it's like it's not a natural thing. It's like them hamming it up or whatever. And Bruce can do that. Bruce when he wants to be funny can be pretty funny. 12 Monkeys is one of those roles that he's really acting, I'd say.
Can you turn this up? Can you make this louder?
He brings a lot of sadness to that role, and the persona that I guess people hire him nowadays, or at least were hiring him nowadays for this just gruff, I don't care, boring. I mean, that's what he's done for the last 20 years. It was an in-joke or whatever that, wow, he cared about this performance or whatever. But there's elements of that where he uses that well, and I'd say 12 Monkeys is one of those where he's so tired of this world that he's living in. The aspects of this future and this mission he's sent on to unravel the past, and you get a lot of that tired Bruce Willis performance, but it's not just tired Bruce Willis. It's part of the performance. It's actually acting. So
because at the time he wasn't known for being tired, so this was a very different thing for him.
Yeah. So I think this is actually one of Bruce's best performances, I think. But also you have such a wonderful film wrapped around it that, all the Terry Gilliam imagination that comes to this movie and the wonderful story that's being told, the twists and the turns and the time travel aspect of it.
Anybody else want to negotiate?
Fifth Element.
Well, it's on there.
Yeah. So now that I've made things real confusing, my order is Die Hard, Pulp Fiction, Fifth Element, 12 Monkeys. But Fifth Element it's not a Die Hard movie, but you get the action. He's back at like the top of the action game, in my opinion. When Fifth Element came out, I think that was definitely after a string of his action movies that weren't considered as awesome as a Die Hard movie. Fifth Element was such a unique summer thrill ride, science fiction that we hadn't quite had. Like lovers of Star Wars, we're always waiting for films that kind of felt like that brought that much imagination and fun to science fiction. And we didn't get it until 97, in my opinion. So we finally had a film that was like, this is like watching Star Wars, but now I'm an adult and I'm enjoying something like that. So, and then Bruce Willis is just so much fun and having such a blast in that movie. His chemistry with everyone he interacts with in the movie, but obviously Milla, the chemistry between him and Milla, and then the chemistry between him and Chris Tucker. It's just like, there's just so much fun to be had in the performance of Bruce Willis in that movie. It's one of his best hero performances. And it really feels like Hudson Hawk, the humor and silliness that he brings to that role is on display again in this movie, but then you still get some of the awesome action hero that you want out of a John McClane style action hero.
Yeah.
So it's a wonderful mix of his great comedy that you can get and the action hero that we all want to see him excel at.
That movie's on my list. It's so much fucking fun, like you said. There's large stretches of that movie where Bruce Willis is not in it because it's telling a huge story, but done almost in like comic book fashion, by Luc Besson, who is a badass. And I think I had seen, and I'm sure you had too, other Besson movies before that, but that really introduced a lot of the world to that mainstream, big budget Luc Besson, which is a very risky thing to do, but it paid off so well in The Fifth Element when he has the big shootout with the, I can't remember the
changer
things. That scene is so awesome, dude. That's like Die Hard in space right there. That whole scene. Yeah.
You get some of that Die Hard that you want, but it's not a Die Hard movie. It's so different, but yeah.
And you gotta love that blonde hair they give him just to make him look different than John McClane, I guess. But I will always love Negative. I am a meat popsicle.
Negative. I am a meat popsicle.
The Sixth Sense. Not just because of how great of a fucking movie it is. Again, that might be his final kind of that subdued, tired, quiet performance that was done on purpose. Like he's like, I love Bruce Willis's facial expressions when he's talking, him and Haley Joel Osment. Oh my God, dude. Like maybe one of the best child star performances ever, in my opinion. And like they play off each other so good. And there's like little moments of great humor that are written well where like you don't catch it right away, but the next time you watch it, you're like, oh, that was kind of funny. The last 3 or 4 minutes, the reveal that we all know, spoilers, he's dead. He doesn't even have to say anything, just backing up against the wall and the shortness of breath, amongst other things, just him listening to Haley Joel Osment's character as he's so tortured and fucked up and stuff. That and 12 Monkeys, best performance of his for me. And then the movie's just kind of a perfect movie.
Dead people like in graves and coffins.
Well, why don't you give your number 4? Because I already gave mine. Mine was 12 Monkeys.
Well, this is great because my number 4 is The Fifth Element, which we already talked about.
What sets off the metal detectors first?
The lead in your ass or the shit in your brains?
Move on to my number 5 pick. Well, you just talked about it. It's The Sixth Sense. I have to agree with everything you said, that it's one of those subtle performances that actually stands out as, he really is acting in the movie. It has some of that tired persona that you expect, but you understand that based on where his character is at, the failures he thinks he's had in his life. The twist obviously shows he's in a far different place than he thinks he is, but it all makes sense for the character. But the reason I put it at number 5 on mine is because I think the other aspects, a lot like Pulp Fiction, that just the greatness of that movie pulled it to the top, but it's not, in my mind, a Bruce Willis film first. It's a Quentin Tarantino movie. I do look at Sixth Sense as a M. Night Shyamalan movie first. Sure. His best, really. I like some of his other stuff, but still probably consider that his best. So when I think of that movie, I think of him. There are performances in the movie that stand out so much above what Bruce is doing in the movie that I think of it as those things before I get to Bruce on the list, but it is one of Bruce's best movies. It's a great movie. It's a best picture quality movie. It deserves to be here and discussed as one of Bruce's top 5 movies. And I feel like this was one of those movies where it was like, it's just another Mercury Rising. It's him and a kid. It's him in a thriller that's being dumped off in August. No one has any faith in this movie. A director no one's heard of. A horror movie with Bruce Willis. What's that? No one's going to give a crap, with a kid in it. So it's not really going to be scary. It had so many things writing it off, and then it just shocked the world. And I'm so glad that this movie was able to keep it secret because it was a little movie that could. And
no internet. Early days of the internet. Yeah. On
that true word of mouth, but with people knowing that the smart choice is to not spoil it. So this movie was a very special thing, and Bruce will always be tied to that for sure.
So number 5 for me, we've talked about it. Pulp Fiction. Only for everything that you said. I love him in it. He's probably the coolest character. Him and Jules are the coolest characters in the movie. He's an idiot. He's a hothead. He makes fucking dumb decisions, but he has a heart. At the very core of it, he does not let Marcellus keep getting butt pumped. And he goes back at the risk of losing everything to save that guy when that guy's fate was doomed. And that is a well-written character right there. All of these to me are interchangeably great, except with Die Hard sitting at the very top, obviously. But
see, our lists were the same.
Well, of course.
They just were in slightly different orders. And
got good taste.
And I think we both agree our orders could really be interchangeable to where really if we put them in the exact same order, we'd be just as happy.
I would give honorable mentions to movies that I know aren't that great, but they're just fun, like The Last Boy Scout. Like, as I got older as an adult and I watched that movie, the cracks started showing up on how ludicrous and ridiculous it was, you know. But as a kid, that was maybe his one buddy cop movie, even though Damon Wayans wasn't technically a cop. It was like a buddy action comedy.
Yeah. A couple other ones that I liked that came in the early 2000s were Bandits with Bob.
The Elmore Leonard book, yeah.
And Heart's War, which was a POW film.
Yeah.
Those ones were all right, you know, but otherwise most of the stuff I really loved by him was in the 90s.
Yeah, and Death Becomes Her, he's really funny in that movie.
Yes, he is.
He's very funny, and he plays kind of this older guy, and they kind of make him look just super doofusy, and I have a soft spot for that movie.
I agree with you. Yeah. And I love how that one turns out for him, you know, that how much life he's able to live after he gets away from those two jackals.
Live Free or Die Hard marks the end of his charismatic action star heights, because if you rewatch that movie, he's way up there with the charisma again. It's like kind of his last hoorah as that character. He went on to do some other stuff after, but that's the last time him as an action star was just fucking shit up, being funny, having the quibs, and just tons of charisma. The good thing is like we have all the movies that we already have, and was he going to make a movie that was better than what we talked about? Probably not. So at this point, we just hope he's okay and his family's okay and he's doing okay. Like, that's all that matters. Go get some rest. You know?
Exactly. You've earned it.
Thank you, Bruce Willis. We will love you forever.
And as you American cowboys always say, as you ride off in the sunset,
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.